good morning, good morning. It's Dr. Chris Roddenberry coming to you from Willow Springs, North Carolina, in my office on my temporary laptop. Things are going to look a little different for the next couple of days, but I hope it works okay while I get things set up. If you can hear me, please go ahead and type in the chat bar and let me know if you can hear my sound. Okay, let's see what we get. Okay, fantastic. Can you hear me when I go up here? Can you hear me as well here? Okay, fantastic. Okay, cool. So I'm trying to set up my office on my new laptop. I had my old laptop shipped off to Microsoft. Hopefully it'll be back in a couple of weeks, but till then I'm going to be running the broadcast on a new machine. You can actually tell me if the broadcast works better. Maybe I'll keep my temporary machine and not get my old machine back. It's good to see you, Salim. It's good to see you, Andrew, Lewis. Thanks for coming today. We're going to finish up yesterday's lecture and then try to catch up and finish all of today's lecture. So let's go ahead and go to the PowerPoint presentation. Not milestones. We're past that. Jean Piaget. Now, if you remember, I suggested to you developmental psychology is the study of how human beings change over the course of a lifespan, physically, mentally, cognitively, and emotionally. All right. Now, yesterday we spent a good deal of time talking about how human beings change physically, especially over the first 2 years. And I talked about the neurological changes in our brain. Let's stop and take a different approach and talk about how human beings change intellectually. If you've ever been around infants, you'll notice that they don't know much. If you've ever been around 2-year-olds, you'll notice that they don't know much more. And as we grow and develop, our intellectual abilities go from reflex behaviors, which are possessed by lots of animals, to this really thoughtful, reasoned behavior that you and I exhibit, hopefully, every day. All right. I suggested to you that Jean Piaget was the first to give a unified theory. Not a great theory, very short on specifics. However, his broad brushstrokes really have sort of created the field of developmental psychology. And although many researchers now disagree with a lot of his stuff, his framework for how human minds change, I would say, is still a good way of thinking about human intellectual functioning. So we argue that we have these things called schemes. They are reflexes that become voluntary, if you will. We understand, we notice the reflexes lead to outcomes, and that creates these very simple plans. And he argues that these simple plans form the bedrock of all knowledge as we build on these schemes using the processes of assimilation and accommodation. Okay? Now, he argued that human beings evolve their intellectual abilities. So he argues that sort of a human being steps up in their intellectual development. They start out at a certain area, and you'll notice that they'll be interested in the same things and have the same kinds of functions and abilities. And all of a sudden, the human being will step up to another level of intellectual functioning. And he posited that human beings have 4, if you will, levels of intellectual functioning, 4 broad steps of intellectual functioning. Now, he broke these down into 4 stages: the sensory motor, the preoperational, the concrete operational, and the formal operational. So what he argued was that human beings go through this stage of life for the first 2 years of their life where they are really incapable of holding symbolic thoughts in their mind. Now, of course, hold on, children are smarter than that, but this was his broad theory. He argued that children during this age are pre-symbolic. They really don't think about something if it's not in their world of sensations. The child, the 6-month-old baby, is only interested in the ball as long as it is in front of him. take that ball away from the 6-month child, and you'll probably see that they will act as if it never existed at all. And according to Jean Piaget, it didn't. He argued that children spend the first year to 2 years of their life in this pre-symbolic stage of life where they can't keep objects in their mind. Instead, they work with their senses and their motor movements. Now, he argued that you can demonstrate this by two basic limitations that children have during this age. Children, when they look in the mirror, don't realize that they are an object. They don't think of themselves as an object. So they don't have what he called objective self-awareness. And if you show kids at a certain youthful age, like this child right here, you show them a mirror, they won't really know that they're looking at themselves. Now you'll notice this little kid has a piece of, has a little bit of dark chalk on their nose. This is called the chalk test, or the dot test, or the rouge test. And basically what they do is they subtly put a mark on a child's nose. They show them a mirror, and if the child does this, that represents understanding that the child is an object. And what you'll find is that children before the age of 12 months or so don't really think about reaching up and touching that little chalk on their nose. And he also showed that children don't have the ability to really hold an object in their mind. If you show a child an object and then hide it right in front of them, what you will notice is that child will pretend as if the object never existed. Now, if you find these ideas interesting, I've got videos in the course resources folder demonstrating both object permanence and objective self-awareness. I don't have time to show them here today, but you should go to your course resources folder and see these. And he argued that children spend the first part of their life in this pre-symbolic period. Now, what he argued is that sometime around the age of 2 years of age, he studied his own 3 children, so he wanted to be very careful and conservative in his estimates of how long it took for this stage to end. Most kids are going to be demonstrating object permanence and objective self-awareness to a certain degree by the age of 12 months. But what he argued is that this represents this symbolic free age. Now, what he suggested is that once children demonstrate object permanence and objective self-awareness, they've then moved into a second level of intellectual functioning. Okay? Oh no, oh no, oh no, where is it? Where are those slides? Crapola, crapola, crapola. Okay, hold on just a minute as I go to my slide deck. Where are those slides? Open. Hold on just a second. Uh-oh. Oh, wrong one. 4B, 4A. Let's see. Oh my goodness. Oh, there you are. Excuse me, folks. Oh, give me a break. Here we go. Okay. So, he then argued that the child goes into what he would call a second stage of cognitive development. He called it the pre-operational period. Now focus on this name, pre-operational. Operation is a logical representation. You know, think about an operation as 4 plus 4 equals 8. That's an operation. It obeys a set of rules. He argued that children are symbolic, but they're not very logical. He called this pre-operational period. And he demonstrated this with lots of nifty little thought experiments that children couldn't quite figure out. But I'm going to ask you to consider two things. Do you remember that time when you believed in Santa Claus? When you believed in the Tooth Fairy? Even though those are the most ridiculous, illogical ideas you could ever imagine, there was a time in your life when you thought a guy dressed in a red furry suit flew around the world with millions and millions of presents for millions and millions of kids, and he delivered those presents on Christmas morning, Christmas Eve, right? Do you know how ridiculous that is? Insanely so. But all children from 2 until around the age of 6 or 7 continue to believe in this idea. He argued that these children fall for the idea of Santa Claus because they are pre-logical or pre-operational. And so what he would do is he demonstrated this not so much with demonstrations about Santa Claus, but he would actually give children logical tasks to do. And he showed that 2 to 5 to 6-year-old children couldn't do these tasks. Actually, 2 to 4-year-old children couldn't do these tasks at all. And then the kids, when they were around 4 to 5 to 6, would start figuring some of these tasks out. And he showed that children can't do all of these logical tasks until around the age of 7. Now, what were these tasks? Well, if you look over on the far side, he's giving this 9-year-old girl a conservation task. Now, I can tell by looking at this girl that she's probably 9. There's no way she's going to fall for this, but you would be surprised how often a 4-year-old will fall for this. Now, if you'll notice that in the top frame there are 2 glasses, each filled with the same amount of water. Now, what the psychologist does is after getting the girl to understand that the 2 glasses have the same amount of water, letting the girl come to that judgment, they then take one of those glasses and pour it into that taller, thinner glass. Now, what do you notice about the water level? The water level goes up higher. Now, do those 2 glasses contain the same amount of water? Of course they do, because we didn't change the amount of water. We just poured it into a different glass. That's you, my friend, can have the ability to conserve liquid. You know that liquid doesn't change if you just change the shape of it, right? Now, a 3 or a 4-year-old is going to fall for that and say that there's a bigger amount of water in the tall glass, even though they saw you pour the water into the second glass. This child has the inability to conserve. And Piaget tested this on all kinds of dimensions. He tested it with water, the conservation of liquid. He did it with the conservation of number, so numbers of objects. He would spread objects out, and he would spread a line of 5 objects out larger than he would this other line of 5 objects, and the kids would say that the longer line contained more objects. He could conserve matter, conserve length. He demonstrated that your pre-operational children failed this very simple logical task across a number of different demonstrations. So he found that the children couldn't do these logical conservation tasks. And then if you look right underneath me, he demonstrated that these children, pre-operational children, don't have the ability to take another person's perspective. Okay, so right now, if I ask you to imagine what I'm looking at, you probably say, well, Dr. Roddenberry's looking at a computer screen, and because there's lights, the image is light, and I see his face, he's looking at a camera and a set of lights. You can tell what I'm looking at because you have the ability to get into my perspective. I, on the other hand, think that you're probably sitting there either looking at a phone or you're looking at your computer screen and you're looking at my PowerPoint presentation. You know why I know that? Because I have the ability to get into your perspective. What he found was that these pre-operational children, like this little 3-year-old boy right here, will not be able to tell the teacher that the teacher can probably see the tree. Now, what they do in this task is they show this boy the mountains and this tree, and there's a little coyote. You can't see it in the picture. And it's set up so that if you're on one side of that mountain, you can only see the coyote, but if you're on the other side of the mountain, you can only see the tree. And what they'll do is they'll let this young boy see it from all different angles, and then they'll sit across him and ask the young boy, "What do I see?" And typically the young child will report that the experimenter sees whatever it is they can see. So this little boy is going to say, "You can see the wolf," even though if the experimenter is sitting on the exact opposite side, all he can see is the tree. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but what he suggested is that these children have trouble seeing something from another person's perspective. So think about it. Your child is symbolic. They do all these crazy games. They play lots of imaginary games. If you've ever watched 3 or 4 years old, they'll play with symbolic toys like trucks and Barbie dolls, and they'll play games. But they don't understand these logical ideas that the properties of objects can't change or are conserved, and that other people may have different perspectives. These are both, if you will, logical abilities that pre-operational children don't have. And then he had a third task that I think your book mentions a little bit, which is seriating objects, which is aligning objects from smaller to larger, from taller to shorter, along a particular dimension. And what you're going to find is that pre-operational children take much longer and make a lot more errors when they are trying to do a seriation task than you would be as an adult. It would take you 2 seconds to put 10 pencils in line from shortest to tallest. 10 seconds tops, but it's going to take a little 3-year-old several minutes and several mistakes to get it right, if they can do it. And so what the milestones that demonstrate that your child is done with the pre-operational period is when they can do these things. They can conserve objects, they can see something from another person's perspective, and they can seriate quickly and easily. And then Piaget argued that children went into this stage of concrete operational development. That's stage 3. Now, do we have any teachers in the house? Do any of you want to be elementary teachers when you grow up? Hi, Medina. Good to see you. Good to see you, Heaven. Thanks for joining the broadcast. Do any of you have designs on being a 3rd grade teacher? One of the things that's going to be very important to you when you become a primary school teacher, a teacher that teaches from kindergarten to 6-year-old to 4th or 5th grade, is they're going to teach you that your children are in the concrete operational period. I promise you that this comes into play in this primary education, because what your teacher did to you in 2nd and 3rd grade was everything was an experience. You drew a picture about it. You had a model to play with. You had toys to look at and things to hold. Have you ever gone to a museum, a science museum, and you notice how they always have a kid zone? And in the kids zone, the kids can do things and manipulate objects. And that's how they learn, because children at this age are logical. They can do the seriation task. They can do the classification tasks. They have the ability to see somebody else's perspective. They can conserve. But what they're not good at is thinking about things that they can't see or touch or are very familiar. So if you do decide you're going to be a 1st grade teacher, they're going to tell you that you have to have experientials. Your kids are going to have to be able to touch everything you talk about so that they can learn the concepts. This is because your children are logical, but they're not great at abstract thinking. All right. Now, they're best at reasoning logically about familiar or concrete concepts. So if you ever learned about the solar system and your teacher had the money, you had to get the styrofoam balls of different sizes and you had to paint them the color of the different planets. Or maybe if you learned about the Declaration of Independence, you had this little setup where everybody had to dress up as a different character of the Continental Congress and give a little speech. And one of you maybe even had to say Patrick Henry's lines. As for me and mine, I say, give me liberty or give me death. That's what he said, excuse me. So that's because children are concrete and operational during this period. Now, Piaget thought this age lasted from about 7 to around 12 years of age. And if you ask kids abstract or weird questions, what you're going to see is that your pre-operational kids are going to take it very, very literally, while older people are going to be able to think more abstractly about these ideas. So, here's a question. How would the world be if we didn't have thumbs? Think about it. What would change in our world if we didn't have thumbs? Now, if you ask a 12 or a 9-year-old about this and an 18-year-old about this question, the 9-year-old's going to focus on the fact that you can't play video games. You have more trouble with your phone. They're going to focus on the very concrete aspects of that hypothetical. However, if you ask the 18-year-old, they're going to be able to say, wow, the whole world would change, right? Society would never be the change because would never have developed, because thumbs, the opposable thumb, is very important for all of these things, from eating to building things to etc., etc. And what you're going to find is that your 18-year-old will give you a more abstract answer than your 12-year-old or 9-year-old will give you. And he argued that this is because people in the formal operational stage of development can think abstractly. And he even imagined this thing called hypothetico-deductive reasoning. Let me tell you this story. My friends and I used to play tennis ball, baseball at this tennis court that backed right up to a set of apartments. I mean, there was literally like 15 feet between the back wall of the tennis court and the first apartment. And we would play tennis ball, baseball, and you would hit home runs by hitting it out of the tennis court and bouncing it across the street on the apartment, across the little walkway, right? And one day we didn't have a tennis ball, but I had a hard baseball, and we decided to play tennis ball, baseball in that tennis court that day. What do you think probably happened when we played tennis ball, baseball with a real hard baseball across from that apartment complex that day? What do you think happened? I'll give any of you a chance to guess. Take a wild guess what happened. What do you think happened when we played tennis ball, baseball with a real ball? We smacked a home run out of the tennis court across that little walkway, and it broke one of those windows in that apartment complex, and we all took off running. And you know what, if my dad had asked me later, didn't you realize if you were going to play baseball right beside a house with a hard baseball, wouldn't you think that, yes, exactly, Heaven, don't you think I could have figured that out before I played the baseball game? Well, you know what, as a 12-year-old, I didn't have what you might call hypothetico-deductive reasoning. Piaget would have argued I didn't really have the ability to imagine future outcomes. So here's what I want you to understand in this development. Human minds change. According to Piaget, he provided this superstructure for how human being reasoning changes as we grow older. We go from a pre-symbolic period to a symbolic but not logical period. Then from a symbolic and not logical period to a symbolic and logical period where we're constrained to really thinking about things concretely. And then we develop hypothetical or abstract thinking abilities. And he argued that the mind evolved into these 4 stages. For the exam, I'm going to want you to know these 4 stages, and more importantly, what the milestones or the limitations were in that particular stage, so that you can understand what children can and can't do. And whenever you interact with children and people of different ages, be it as a teacher or as a nurse, you're going to be able to understand what kind of reasoning this person has and how you need to deal with them based upon their abilities. Now, one last note I do want to mention, we haven't talked about development in late adulthood yet, but I do want you to know that human beings do not stop changing when they become 18. In fact, you're changing your entire life. The only problem is you're changing for the better, and at some point, your mental abilities begin to decline as well. And so one thing that developmental psychologists are interested in is how people's mental abilities decline in older age, and what are the causes, and can these causes be dealt with in an effective manner. The study that your book's going to point you to, that I'm going to talk about, which is they followed participants between the ages of 25 and 81 years for 7 years. This is what's known as a cross-sequential design. They followed people at different ages. So if you want to look at people, how people change, you can do it by comparing people of different ages right now. So I could go out, I could get a 25-year-old now, a 45-year-old now, a 60-year-old now, and I could say, you know what, I'm going to look at what they can and can't do, and I'm going to see if that, and I'm going to say that that's how mental abilities change as you get older, because I'm comparing a 25-year-old with a 45 with a 65-year-old. Or you can take the same person and follow them over 20 or 30 years. And that's kind of difficult because that makes for a very long research paper. But what they did in the Seattle longitudinal study was they did both of those. They did what's known as a cross-sequential method. So they followed people at different ages, who starting with people who were as young as 25 and people who were as old as 81. And what they did was they followed people in these different age groups for 7 years to look at how change occurred during the adulthood. And what they found was that intellectual decline really does not begin until the 70s. So when we talk about people, not being sharp at 50 or 60, actually you are. If you look at this graph underneath, what they're going to show you is that your fluid intelligence, which we like to think of as your creative flexibility, your intellectual flexibility, that does sort of top out around 45 or 50. But what's going to stay in your brain much longer is your crystallized intelligence, your knowledge for facts and figures. And what's going to keep you functioning through early and middle adulthood is you're going to be a more clever and efficient worker. We talk about people who have experience. Your 50-year-old may not reason as flexibly and as quickly as your 25-year-old, but they know how to get the job done because they've been doing it for 20 years. So what you're going to notice is that there are some changes in human mental abilities. You're going to be a little less flexible starting in early adulthood, the 30s and the 40s. But your crystallized intelligence, your ability for facts, is not going to decay until much later in your life. Now, really, that's going to start in your 70s if you're normal. However, like it says down here, not everybody. This doesn't happen for everybody. One of the things that you are not going to believe if you take my developmental psychology class is how important lifestyle is in your quality of life and the length of your life. So the things that you're doing now, 25 and 35 and 45, exercising, not exercising, eating right, not eating right, meditating, avoiding hard drugs and grain alcohol. These things really do have an impact on your life outcomes. And what this is going to suggest to you, this brief note I have, is that being a regular aerobic exerciser, jogging, biking, walking upstairs, getting your heart rate elevated in your 50s and 60s and 70s is going to really put off the cognitive decline that really normally starts in the 70s. You can live sharp and healthy if you just keep yourself exercised and fit. Flexibility of thinking, problem solving declines much earlier, and the speed of processing and the speed of learning declines, and multitasking is more difficult as you hit my age. All right. Now, we typically talk about dementia, which is a dramatic loss in mental abilities, and there are different ways. There's not just Alzheimer's, but Alzheimer's is one very well-known type of cognitive decline that you will see in middle to late adulthood. And it's the most common type of dementia in later adulthood. Now, if it occurs before 65, we say you've got early onset Alzheimer's, but it usually begins later in life. There's no way to prevent or cure Alzheimer's disease. It actually turns out that it's created by the development of these plaques and tangles in your neurons, which start killing off neurons in your brain. So if you've ever gone to the dentist and they scraped plaque off your teeth, you can get the same buildup in a sense in your brain. And what it does is, just like plaque leads to cavities, plaque and protein tangles in your brain kill neurons, and as those brain neurons die, the person loses those intellectual abilities. However, I will tell you, exercise. I'm not saying it prevents Alzheimer's. I'm not saying if you get Alzheimer's it's because you didn't exercise, but we do know that vigorous heart rate elevating exercise 3 to 4 times a week is really going to decrease the odds that you are affected by one of these terrible problems. Okay, any questions so far? Now I'm going to switch gears again. We just talked about cognitive development. So on Tuesday I talked about how your nervous system changes. Your neurons change, they myelinate, and you have dendritic spreading and blooming and pruning, and I talked to you about how we evaluate that change. Then earlier in this class I talked about a theory of how your intellectual abilities develop. So cognitive psychologists are interested in how your biological system develops. We're interested in how your intellectual system develops, so that we can create more effective education for you as you grow up. Now, what we're going to do now is talk a little bit about socio-emotional development, how personality develops in human beings. And I'm going to hit a couple of huge theories, and I'm going to hit them so quickly I feel badly I'm doing them such a disservice. But I'm going to try to get a fairly good discussion of at least one of them in, maybe 2 before the class ends. Now, the first thing we do want to talk about is this fundamental mammalian need we call attachment. Human beings are super duper clever, but as I suggested to you, our brains become very undeveloped. We have no intellectual abilities, as Piaget suggested. Human infants are more helpless than many other mammalian infants. If you've ever been on a farm, you've seen that little baby chickadees are born and are pretty self-reliant minutes after being born. I remember seeing a little calf be born, and 2 minutes later that calf is up and walking around on its legs. Can you imagine a human being walking 2 minutes after being born? Absolutely not. We are so helpless that we have to have a way to bond the primary caregiver, the animal that gave birth, with the animal that was just born. If this doesn't happen, that animal will not survive. So, as you move up the evolutionary ladder and you see more complex nervous systems that take longer to develop, you're going to see more parental-child bonding processes. And those processes are going to get longer and more involved as we move up the evolutionary ladder. we're going to talk specifically about human beings and their bonding process. So we're going to talk about this thing called attachment, which is the complex and sometimes lengthy brain development in mammals requires that the caregiver take care of the development. The attachment mechanism creates this strong bond between the helpless infant and caregiver that is necessary. So attachment is the close bond between an infant and primary caregiver that develops during the first year and a half, let's actually say 2 years of life. This fellow, if you look over on the far left, very, very famous study done by Harry Harlow. Back in the day, the question was asked, why do infants bond with their mothers? Is it because their primary caregivers feed them, or is there something deeper? And what this guy demonstrated with these rhesus monkeys was that the need for comfort, for feeling safe, was much more important than the need for food in these rhesus monkeys. If you look in the picture over there, you'll notice that one of those monkeys is holding a baby bottle with food, and the other monkey doesn't have a baby bottle, but it is soft and comfy to lay on. And what this guy Harry Harlow found was that even though the monkeys fed off of the wire mother a couple of minutes a day, they spent over 23 hours of their time snuggling on the warm, soft, fuzzy mother. And what he suggested was that monkeys preferred this terry cloth mother to a wire mother that had food. Now, the upshot is these monkeys never grew up normal. These monkeys had difficulty fitting in. And again, I've got video I can show you on that. These monkeys were very disturbed not having their monkey mother around. So these monkeys had no mom to go to. They only had these two monkeys right here. And what he showed was that these monkeys, though deprived and growing up abnormally, these monkeys needed the soft touch of the terry cloth monkey. Now, we might ask ourselves, why do infants need to be calmed down? Well, we're going to talk about this in the stress chapter, but when you're afraid, your stress hormones go up. You quit exploring and learning, and extended periods of exposure to stress hormones is actually bad for the body. So we think that the reason that infants are so bonded to their mother is that the mom helps decrease, the primary caregiver, excuse me for being sexist, the primary caregiver provides a sense of comfort to this developing organism that allows it to feed and relax and learn and develop neurologically. Now, you can't take infant babies away from their moms and their other caregivers and give them wire and cloth mothers to snuggle to. You can't do that. It's incredibly unethical to do to humans. And in fact, there are people who disagree with Harry Harlow's studies of doing it with monkeys. But one thing you can do is you can look at children's relationship with their primary caregivers to see if there are differences in how infants attach to their primary caregivers. So Mary Ainsworth did this very study, and she would bring children into her laboratory with their primary caregiver, and then she would put these children through two very common fears that children have. Children during the first couple of years of life, starts about 6 months and lasts from 2 to 2.5 years, is what we call separation anxiety. Children tend to get upset when separated from their primary caregiver, and there's a certain period. Some children are better than others, but there's a period of emotional discomfort that children feel when separated from their primary caregiver in a strange place. And so she would bring these mothers, these primary caregivers and their babies into the laboratory, and she would have them sit in a room, and then she would have the primary caregiver get up and leave the room so that the infant was alone by themselves. She then subjected these children to a second very common stressor, which is a stranger. And what you're going to see is that most children demonstrate stranger anxiety during this stage. They are very afraid of strangers. So instead of the mom coming back in, a stranger would come in, and the child would get even more upset at this. And over the course of about 12 and a half minutes, what Mary Ainsworth would do was subject this kid to both stranger anxiety and separation anxiety. And then what she did was she measured how well the child was able to reunite with the mother. And she found that children have 3 different ways in which they tended to respond to their primary caregiver after being subjected to these 2 fears. She found that some of the children seemed to be quickly calmed by the return of their mother. They would crawl up, they would crawl into their mom's primary caregiver's lap. They would cry a little bit, but they would quickly stop crying and return to normal and begin their exploratory behavior. She called these children securely attached. On the other hand, and about half of the children were like this. However, the other half of the children acted in a way that she suggested represented a non-optimal attachment style. She found that some of these children, when mom came back into the room, had trouble getting over their tears and their fear. And these children would crawl up into mom's lap and cling to their mom for dear life. And they wouldn't be able to stop crying. And they had trouble returning to normal. She suggested that these children were ambivalent in their attachment style. They were a little clingy. And she found about 20% of the kids demonstrated this ambivalent attachment style. Now, she found that another 20% exhibited a different pattern of non-optimal attachment style. These children also had trouble crying, stopping their crying, but they appeared not to want to have anything to do with the mother, as if they were angry. So the mom would pick them up and the child would still be crying, but they would refuse to look at their mom, unlike the ambivalent children. And what she suggested is that these children had an avoidant attachment style. So the question is, children need this attachment with their primary caregiver to develop during the first 2 years. It relaxes them and allows them to manage their anxiety, their fear in a strange new world. And it allows them to develop normally, for them to explore and to do the exploration kind of activities that are going to stimulate that brain. Remember, we talked about stimulating that brain. And so children need to develop this comfortable relationship with their primary caregiver. Now, how do we know children are going through this process? Well, they develop some really normal fears that tell us that they really love their caregiver and need the security of the caregiver. One of those is stranger anxiety, and the other is separation anxiety. These tell us that the child is bonding well with the primary caregiver. However, there are lots of different caregiving styles out there in the world, and some caregiving styles aren't consistent or don't meet the child's needs. And what this may lead to is children developing non-optimal attachment styles. And what Mary Ainsworth demonstrated was that you could group these attachment styles into 3 broad categories based upon how easy they were able to be soothed by being with the mom. Okay? Now, here's the crazy thing. You might say, Chris, why does that matter? Well, it turns out that there are adult-related outcomes that are affected by a child's attachment style, because we think of attachment as the first intimate relationship you've ever had. And so that intimate relationship provides a model for how all other relationships go. And if you have a clingy relationship with your primary caregiver, you might have a clingy relationship style as an adult romantic partner or an adult friend. If you have an avoidant relationship style with your primary caregiver, we think that you might have an avoidant relationship style with your intimate partners. And so what your book's going to suggest is that there is research to support the idea that adult romantic attachment styles are affected by the bond we create with our primary caregiver during the first year of life. If you would take a quick moment and look at these 4 attachment styles. Which one of these attachment styles do you think represents, let's say, the last romantic partner you had? The last romantic partner you had. You can talk about yourself if you want. You can talk about your current romantic partner, or you can talk about a current or a romantic partner that you've had. But does anybody recognize one of these relationship styles? Is it easy for you to become emotionally close to others? Are you uncomfortable getting emotionally close to others? Do you want to be completely intimate with others but find that they don't want to meet you as intimately as you meet them? Or are you just comfortable without having emotional relationships at all? Do you have a particular style? Now, last thing. Let's talk a little bit about how your personality develops as you grow older. So that was basically what I just talked about, was the important biological need that we have to develop a close bond with our primary caregiver. I suggested to you that this is an evolutionarily adapted thing. We are all programmed to love our babies, and our babies are programmed to love us. And that's an important part of healthy human development. But if you think about it, personality is more complex than your attachment to your mom, and it develops over the entire lifespan and not just over the first 2 years of life. And so your book is going to present you a model of personality development by a fellow named Erik Erikson. If we have any nurses in the audience, your nursing school here at Wake Tech is going to talk an awful lot about Erik Erikson. Erik Erikson was a sort of, if you will, a follower of Freud, and he argued that human beings develop their personality by having to come to grips with 8 important questions in life. He called them crises, but he didn't mean that they were bad things. They were just intersections in life when you had to make a decision. Have you ever heard the term identity crisis? If you've ever heard the term identity crisis, that's actually a term coined by this fellow named Erik Erikson. And he argued that all of us have to go through 8 different personality crises in our life, and we have to resolve all of these crises in order to develop a normal, healthy personalities. Okay, now he spent his entire life focusing on his own identity because he had a very interesting sort of upbringing. He was a big, tall, blonde, blue-eyed Jewish guy being brought up in Nazi Germany. So nobody really liked him. His Jewish friends didn't like him because he looked like an Aryan. His German schoolmates didn't like him because he was a Jew. He grew up not knowing who his father was, and he had different men who were important in his life. This guy spent his entire life trying to figure out who he was. And he thought that really, to a certain degree or another, we all spend our life trying to figure out who we are. How many of you are wondering who you are right now? trying to figure out your vocation, trying to figure out your romantic identity, trying to figure out your political identity? How many of you are still struggling with what it means to be you? And so this guy, Erik Erikson, was really interested in understanding how human beings create or resolve this idea of who I am. And he developed this theory of identity development and this idea of identity crisis. Now, he argued that we're thoughtfully engaged in the process of constructing our identity. Our identity unfolds as we resolve 8 important crises or tasks in our lives. Each one of these successes, every time we successfully do this, we develop a positive personality quality. He called it a virtue. Strip it of its morality. I don't want you to be thinking of Judeo-Christian morality when you say virtue. I mean a strength, a personality strength, if you will. And each one of these crises revolves in a different way in which we interact with people in our life. And if you have trouble in one of these stages, it has repercussions for your ability to develop through the other stages of personality. Okay, now, here's the thing. We have run out of time, and I do not have time to talk about Erik Erikson. However, I will tell you on the homework and the exam, I'm going to want you to know the infancy stage, the adolescence stage, and the middle adulthood stage. Okay? And what I want you to do is go back and look in your textbook. And basically each one of these groups has a question you have to ask. So for infancy, it's trust versus mistrust. Is the world a safe place, and are people reliable? And you get this from your primary caregiver if they take care of your needs. If they do, then you develop the virtue of hope. And if you're abused as an infant, you will never be able to develop normally because you will have failed this first stage of psychosocial development. In adolescence, you're trying to figure out who you are and develop a sense of identity. If you do that, then you join society as a member that believes in society. You develop fidelity. That is, you have a loyalty to society. You've decided to step into society. As a middle adulthood, I'm trying to figure out if I make a difference in the world. Am I doing a good job raising my kids? Am I saving for their future and my future? Am I building a better world for tomorrow through my teaching? And if I do feel like that, then I develop the virtue of care. And so I want you to be able to describe those crises that we have in different parts of our life and how they relate to our personality. I will tell you as a quick note, if things change in your life, Erikson said that you might have to come back and deal with a stage again. So for example, young adulthood, he said, is about intimacy and isolation, falling in love, finding a partner. Well, if you get divorced at 50, 55, or 60 years of age, you have to come back and revisit that stage. If you lose a job when you're 50, you have to come back and think, am I a person who can do something well? You may have to come back to your industry versus inferiority stage. So we may always be dealing with these stages if things happen during our lifetime that challenge our personality. I am so sorry for having to hurry through that last little bit of the lecture. We were running out of time. I got behind on Monday, and so I had to speed through Tuesday just a little bit. Tomorrow and Wednesday, we are going to be talking about sensation and perception. I'm going to be talking about vision, the sense of taste, the sense of touch, smell, and hearing. And so we're going to talk a little more about biopsychology tomorrow before we start getting mental in this class. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Is anybody even watching this broadcast? I see that we have 8 people here, but I haven't talked to anybody in a while, and I'm afraid that people have logged off the broadcast. If you're still there, type a hi in the chat bar. Don't forget to, oh, there we go. I still have some people. God bless you, Lewis. Thank you so much. No questions. Fantastic. Excellent, folks. Well, look, have a great day. Don't forget the discussion board is available, and you should do that as soon as possible. That's coming up. We have webinar tomorrow night at Wednesday, and I'll see you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock to talk about the visual process. Take care. Have a great day. Bye.